Welcome to United and Independent. But it's not enough to just be registered. It's time to take action. Our goal on this show is crystal clear: to educate, motivate, and unite. We're going to show you the incredible position and power you hold right now and what you can achieve by standing together. We're not just talking politics, we're making a difference. This is United and Independent. And now your host, Richard C. Ginnity.
Hello. Thank you for joining us again tonight. Wanted to tell you this is the fourth question, the fourth problem that our candidates needed to address or at least agree to. So we're going to talk about education, as we announced before, and we're going to get right into it. And it's going to start off with articles, and you probably won't be surprised, that were on Wall Street Journal. And the first one was an article in the opinion section written by a person who's co-director of Reinventing America's Schools project at the Progressive Policy Institute. So it's not a Republican, so to speak, response. But she says Joe Biden needs a winning issue. And she says school choice should be it. Now that, I think, coming from a progressive might be surprising, because I think my immediate reaction was Biden won't go there because he's, and most Democrats candidates get major support, both money, but more importantly, bodies in running their campaigns, because the school unions, the employee unions, are a strong factor in the Democratic story. So I was surprised that anyone said that. But she makes the argument that charter schools are free, public, and open to all. And there's been an argument to say, well, charter schools are okay, but they don't work in the hinterlands. And she said a survey from the current project found that 87% of low and middle income Black women believe the one-size-fits-all school systems of the past often doesn't meet student needs. That's 87%. 6 of 10, she also says, 6 of 10 Black mothers strongly agreed that they were more likely to vote for a candidate who supported giving parents more choice over where to send their children to school. Those, again, it's going on making her case. It's a great little article. And so she goes on, those findings are consistent with a 2023 study by Democrats for Educational Reform, which I hadn't heard of before, which found that 77% of parents viewed public charters favorably, including 80% of the Blacks and 71% of Latino parents. Okay, which makes that argument. I won't read the rest, but I go on to Greg Abbott. Now, Greg Abbott, as you probably well know, is the current governor of Texas and an independent and clearly a Republican politician. But he was saying, and what he's doing is actively going toward school choice. So last year, he lost a vote in the Texas House and Senate by about 21 votes. And so what he did this year is fund their opposition. There were 21 of them that came up apparently for election. So what has happened in Texas is that he has won 5 of the governor's candidates, won outright on Tuesday, this last Tuesday. 2 more outpolled the incumbents, but are heading to runoff, so they're still in question. But also, another challenge lacked the incumbent by a few points, but will get a second choice. Only 2 of Mr. Abbott's picks lost, 2 out of 10. Not all, they said, this isn't all. 3 school choice candidates won open seats. So now he's got 3 more. And so he needs to pick up I think they said roughly a dozen votes totally. He needed to pick up 20 votes from the last vote to flip it. He's right on the cusp of doing exactly that. And he said the runoffs could put him over the top, and the public also had made clear it wants school choice. So I think that's the issue that could be addressing. And you say, is there a problem, perceived or otherwise, in our schools? I think certainly the perception is there. I think most parents say, worried about the school quality. That's often in my neighborhood. They say that's a deciding factor for people moving in my neighborhood is the strength of the local school system. I'm very lucky, been very lucky for my kids, very lucky for my grandchildren. It is a very excellent Moffat school, which is the name of it, grades 1 through 6. Love it. But we won't talk about the middle school because that's my different opinion on that one. All right, so let's talk about the problem. I went to 2 sources to see if there was a problem and what they said about it. Those 2 sources you should be generally aware of, okay? I mean, if you're a parent, if you're 16, you probably don't care. If you're 107, you probably don't care. In between, you care about your children, you care about your grandchildren, and there are sources of information that I believe are legitimate. Okay, there's 2, I'm going to say, international testing organizations. Okay, one is called PISA. I'm going to say PISA. It might be called PISA. It's spelled P-I-S-A. So forgive me for my pronunciation, but it is, and I'll read what it is, Program for International Student Assessment. Okay, it's an international organization that conducts and promotes an quadrennial assessment. That's every 4 years, by the way, of primary and second school age children's abilities in mathematics, reading, and science. Okay, and they evaluate 15-year-olds whether they have the practical application of their knowledge and skills to real life challenges. And so I went there. I also went to something called TIMSS, Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study. So that's what I'm going to be relying on for some of the comments I'm going to be making. But before we get to those comments and results, I want to talk about a group a foundation in this case, that I ran across in doing a lot of research on the internet over this topic. They are called Educational Consumers Foundation. You can look it up on the internet, go to their website. But they're unique in one sense. They have taken the position that they are trying to reach the parents, take the side and the vision and maybe the level of communication of the parents, as opposed to getting the consultants and all the educational systems and the feedback from the Department of Education, and they're going to have a different approach to try to take the parents' position. And I contacted them, and they luckily sent me to their president, which shocked me because I was just seeking some additional background on the topic I was researching. But he was very affable. He wasn't upset that they passed me to him. I think I would have said, why am I talking to you? So I encourage you to take a look at it, because the whole foundation sort of reflects his, I'm here to help. I don't have any axe to grind. I'm not getting paid by anybody. So it really is a very refreshing interview that I did. And I hope to have a podcast with him, but I won't promise that yet. We're talking about it. But I think you should be aware of these people. I apologize, I'm reading here. But they believe that public consultation and oversight should serve more a public relations purposes. Well, they do serve more of a public relation purposes. Decision makers need access to experts who treat consumers' aims and concerns as a priority. So I looked at 2 sources of information. One I wanted to know how much we're spending per student in the various states. And I wanted to compare with what the scoring of the students in those states are doing. Okay? So we'll take the first one, which is cost per student by state. And this is all internet. This is what the internet can really buy us. I can't emphasize this more. I asked the top 10 in 2024. The top 10 were, and I'll just read them. New York was one at $24,000. I'm rounding here, per student. And that was 90% above the national average, by the way. District of Columbia was $23,000 or $22,000. Going down, Connecticut, New Jersey, Vermont, Alaska, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Pennsylvania and Wyoming. Wyoming was 10th, and I'll bring that up because they were at $16,000 at number 10. So it drops from $24,000 at number 1 to at the 10th, it was 16. It was basically 50% higher. Now they go down from that. They go all the way to Utah, which is at $7,600. And remember Utah because it's going to come up again. So that's one aspect. Then I said, okay, well, let's take a look at how they're performing. Does dollars create performance? Basic question. So when they're always saying we need more money, more money, more money, is there a time to say, pause for a second and say, well, wait a second. Is that going to bring us performance? And that's a legitimate question. It's a simple question. And yet it's difficult to answer in part, but okay. So I found SAT scores by state. And I asked for the top 10 there. And I would say, okay, I have the top 10 spenders of money. I want to know if it correlates to the top 10 SAT scores. Now, there's some issues in there that get a little more hairy, if you will. But the top 10 scores, Wisconsin was the top, followed by Wyoming, Kansas, Utah. I told you, remember Utah was 4th. Mississippi, Minnesota, where I'm from, so I'm proud of that. Nebraska, Kentucky, South Dakota, North Dakota. So the upper Midwest really did well. There are 4 states out of 10. They were in the top 10. Now, but then I took the first study, which was the amount of dollars spent per student, and said, well, gee, if they were spending a lot of dollars, they should show up with how they scored. Well, two of the states that I went through that had spent the most actually were on the top list. But let's go which ones. Wyoming, which was 10th at $16,000, came in second. So that's pretty good. They spent money, but their students did well. Nobody else did, of course. Not New York, not Connecticut, not the District of Columbia, not New Jersey, not Vermont, not Alaska, not Massachusetts, not New Hampshire, not Pennsylvania. And you said 2. I said, didn't you say 2? Yeah. Remember Utah, who had the lowest dollars per student at $7,600? Well, they scored 4th in SAT scores. So that kind of blows up the thought that dollars are the difference. Okay? So I wanted to bring you that because I think that's ammunition. I think it's, and I said the issue is more complicated than what I said because certainly you have to look at the income levels of the people, their cost of living, and there are studies that are involved in that. But I think you have to start with the basics and say, listen, money is an issue, but the importance of it is quite reduced. Okay? Because some of the countries that exceed us are not richer than us. Okay? Not spending more than us. So it's a concern that I think we needed to address. The second source that I want to bring to your attention is spelled TIMSS, Trends in International Mathematics and Science Studies. They assess students in grades 4 and 8 every 4 years again. So both of these are 4-year studies, repeating in this case from 1995. So there's some history. And before I go into what they found, okay, I want to introduce you to a certain foundation, which I just happened to get when I was doing this research. And they're called the Education Consumers Foundation, ECF. Although everybody's got an acronym, so ECF can also mean 1,000 other things, I'm sure. What they are is what they say, they're consumer-friendly expertise. So in this case, the consumer are obviously the students, but really, from a control standpoint, it's the parents. And those people, like all of us, walk in not knowing all what education speak is about, the language they use, the whatever, but needing to get the right answer for their children or grandchildren. Okay? And so they are taking, I believe it's unique, they're coming in from a perspective of those, the users of the information, the evaluators of the information, that the school boards, the intelligentsia of the teachers' organizations, all the way up to the national education, are talking about, and whether they're good or bad. And as they point out, often those new programs are assisted, if you will, by outside consultants who have reviewed the current system to what they're proposing. And of course, anything they're proposing has got to be better. Why would they buy it? So, but as a consumer, again, the parents here are at a clear disadvantage. Even if they're well educated, even PhD and whatever you want to call it, they're not necessarily a PhD in education. So they don't know the vocabulary. They don't know if they should challenge it. They don't know enough to really, other than go along, because it's usually associated, as they said, it's usually associated with some money. You know, we just got a grant of $30 million to improve this region's education. Well, you're going to fight that? People are saying, $30 million, our kids are going to get improved. And most people would just say, okay. And that's what they're saying. So you need a consulting agency or source that at least gives you perhaps a different tact or explains it. They're not, I found in talking to the president, that they are not anti-education. They're not anti-improving it. But they're just saying as we do the analysis, we're sort of like the auditors, an outside source saying, we'll look at what they're proposing and give you our perspective on it. And it isn't always going to be negative. I don't want you, because I talked to him, and he seems a very well-balanced, the president, well-balanced, and he said, I'm not an enemy of the educational system. I'm just trying to provide parents and interested people with what we see the proposal. Okay. And I thought, wow, that is really needed. Okay, and again, in the interview, he was not confrontational. He was just trying to help. And I think his whole organization is that. So I suggest you look it up. Again, it's Education Consumers Foundation. Okay? So look it up. It's there. And I'll bring you something they said. They wrote an article. They said, why students in some countries do better. Okay? And that other countries usually have a national ministry of education, which I don't think we have. This sets forth uniform educational goals and standards. Okay, and they went to an agency also. They went to the Kiel Institute of World Economics, reported the largest study of educational efficiency ever conducted. That's ever. They analyzed 39 different countries, and they said these are the 4 main points that foster high achievement. High achievement meaning better than where we are, okay? Because we are not number one in any test I've ever seen, any evaluation I've ever seen, okay? Other than that, there was one that I didn't quite understand the difference. They said we had the best something, the best educational system. I said, with those scores, I don't see how you can get to the best with scoring in not even the top 10. But anyway, we'll pass on that. But 3 of the things I do want to bring your attention to. First, school control over staff and operations. And that needs definition, I'm sure, too. But I believe, and from what I can read, it's at a local level, okay? Probably the principal level, okay? That there's significant control at the school because they are influenced by who's attending that school, what's working. They talk to teachers every day or every month as what's working, what's not. The second point, which I think speaks to the same thing, teacher discretion over teaching methods. So all of us have different approaches to try to teach our kids, try to teach classes, and some are hands-on, some are, right on the blackboard, homework-oriented. But over time, teachers, and you have to say, teachers are trying to teach. Some are probably just trying to get through the day, but there is a lot of highly dedicated teachers that are frustrated when their kids don't do well. They certainly take it personally, but they also, because it reflects on not that the whole scoring or the whole educational success is based upon the teacher. The student has to take a healthy portion of that responsibility as their parents, given the environment to learn. But teacher discretion over teaching methods. Now, almost in every district in the United States, the methods flow down to them, and they're often reviewed and revised. And I don't know about you, but my first reaction is that, and the test scores almost reflect it, listen, between first and third grade, I've got to learn the mathematics, I've got to learn how to read, I've got to learn how to write a little bit. And that hasn't changed for 100 years, or I don't think it ever has changed, okay? And so how often does that process have to be amended, new books, new everything? I'd say, wow, because in any new method, it takes time for the teacher to absorb it. They're not automons. You don't stick in a new cassette and they go crazy, or they just start speaking on it. They have to go through learning. They have to adjust it. They have to adjust it to their style. They have to adjust it to the class they're teaching. It takes time, and usually I would say 2 to 3 years. Because you talked about most teachers, they said, well, it was about the third year where I really thought it was effective because I kind of understood what I had to teach and how I had to teach, okay? And what was work for me and what doesn't. And then they found the fourth one, and I think you should listen to. Competition from private schools, okay? And we're going to talk about what we already have to some extent in what Abbott's doing now there, school choice. And they said a couple things which probably won't be surprised about. Maybe you would be. The influence of teacher unions on curriculum had negative effects. Negative. And surprisingly, spending made no difference. Now, what I'm going to present a little later, I'll try to address that spending issue. I'll leave alone the union issue. But in my view, I've seen the unions, if they impact teacher methods, teacher anything, they object. And I guess that's what a union is for. But so often, the answer to any major problem is more money. More money, more money, more money. And I'm not sure they're always wrong, because I'm sure things need reinvestment. I think AI, which is hitting now, is going to take investment. And I think that's going to make I'll talk to it later, a major impact, a positive major impact. But I just want to bring up those forward. And now we're going to go on. Again, remember it, Education Consumers Foundation. Please remember that name. Use it. I think it's legit. I think they bring a different perspective. And it's a perspective that most parents need, I think, to help them evaluate, because they are in control. Believe it. As you've seen in the last couple of months, when woke had been interwoven, if you will, in the educational system, far more than the parents liked. And once they understood it, they objected to it, and they responded. The system backed off. Okay? And that's their right. Okay? They want their kids taught with what they value, what they believe is the truth, and what they believe leads to a positive person growing up. And that's it. We're not going to spend any more time on the hypothetical ticket that I was proposing for the political independent group. And the reason I'm going to stop or interfere here, I think we might be able to pick it up later, but there has to be major change in circumstances, is because the four named potential ticket makers, if you will, have all said they're not going to do that. They're not going to go a independent ticket. So Manchin has said it, Christie has said it, Nikki has said it, and Romney has said it. So without those four, I didn't have another major well-known figure to use as just for an example. So I'm going to skip it here. And they, by the way, the reasons that they said that they weren't was didn't see a pathway to win, and they didn't want to be a spoiler, I think they used it. All right. Disappointingly, we're not going to get to the section that I was kind of looking forward to, where I said I would go into how I believe they could administer their administration in Washington. And so I'm obviously not going to go there because we're going to drop that. And we're going to go different directions or slightly different directions. And one of those directions is to see what could happen going forward in this time frame from March, which we're in now, to what happens by November. Because I think there are things that could develop very, very quickly, which could bring this third-party issue roaringly back. So we're going to leave it now. I hope you listen to the digression, because I do talk about the one issue that apparently was the decider for a couple of those to drop out, and that is winning. From my perspective, the four who dropped out all took the definition of winning as whether they had a path to the presidency. And that is where I think the mistake is made. So, and I think even to some extent, the group No Labels also would say that's their goal. But I truly believe, and I'll get into it, that winning can be redefined. I mean, that sounds like we're hedging, but I think it really, the effect which we're looking for is change in Washington. Change from the constant bickering and fight in Washington. Not that we'll get rid of differences. There are clearly philosophical differences between the Democrats and the Republicans. But we want it, and so does No Labels want it, back to where we're disagreeing with our neighbors. We're not disagreeing with our death enemies. So I'm challenging that thought in the digression that follows this. So I hope you'll stick around and see if you agree. Thank you.
More significant than ever before. Bigger than the Democrats. Bigger than the Republicans. This is United and Independent. And now, back to your host, Richard C. Ginnity.
This is a digression, and it's an update on prior digression when we talked about No Labels. You may not recall No Labels, but it's a group that's about 12 years old or so, and they have been aiming to have a third choice, third party, consisting of a Democrat and a Republican. And that has, of course, been where I was been going since the beginning of this podcast in January. But they have asked several prominent Democrats and Republicans to run, and they all said no. They asked Manchin, and that would have been a very good one. He said no, he's not going to do that. They asked Christie, no. They asked Nikki, no. And they asked Romney, no. So all of the big names that were sort of bandied about said no. So I expected, there are about 1 million or so people that are members, if you will, of No Labels. And so they still hadn't decided whether they were going to run a candidate. And honestly, I came to the conclusion they won't run because they may be able to get a candidate that has virtually, low national recognition. And that I didn't think was going to work for them because all of the four I mentioned, I should say 2 of the 4 I mentioned, said no because they didn't see a path to winning. And winning, I believe, in their definition, was becoming the president. And that, for most candidates, that would be the decision point also. And I really thought poorly of that. I've said before, winning in this case doesn't take winning the election. And so I'm going to talk about that because as of right now, they're virtually voting right now whether they're going to do that. But the early expectation is they will run a ticket. And so that's being done as we speak on a Friday, March 8th. Okay, so then that I got an article yesterday on. So I thought we should revisit it because it's important to talk about winning. And I think I have gone there before, but I think it's important to revisit that. Now, like I said, Manchin and Christie and all those people said, winning is winning the president. And I clearly think that's wrong. I think winning can be defined as a broader thing than that. Winning, I believe, is changing the current environment. What I mean by that is that I believe, and I'm not alone, believing that we've got a very, what would you say, contentious environment between the Democrats and Republicans, at least in Washington. Contentious meaning they're all bad, they're no good, they're criminal, they're breaking the law, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And both sides are doing that. Trump is verbally very strong in that area, but Biden is, if not him, his group is organized that way. So again, he has, other people who speak for him, but still in that harsh tone, non-working together tone. And in fact, you're seeing that with many retirements on the Republican side. I haven't heard that many on the Democratic side, but those people on the Republican side, they don't want to be there anymore. They're different. And that was part of Manchin's reasons for calling it. It's just not workable in his view. Well, again, I think you have to redefine winning in this case. You have to say, can we win if we change the culture of Washington? Which I think most people say, let me hear it. So let's start with where we are right now. Something like 60 to 70% of the voters are unhappy with the choice they have. And I'm not suggesting how many are Democratic registered voters or Republican registered. I'm just saying 60 to 70% of all the registered voters are unhappy with the choice they have. But what has happened traditionally, and that's what they'll say, is, they're unhappy, but they'll join the Republicans that are unhappy. Will say, who else we got? Are we going to elect Biden? And they say, no, okay, then I'll vote reluctantly. I'll vote for, in this case, Trump. And on the Democratic side, they're going to say the same thing. Biden's too old and not firm, but we've got to go with him because we're certainly not voting for Trump. So that's how they view it. And are they wrong? Not totally. No, I can't say they're wrong. But let me say that if No Labels can make a big enough splash, and by the way, their goal was to have a centrist ticket. Okay, I'm not sure, but my best guess would be slightly centrist left, but slight is the right word, not dramatically. And so the decision I think that all of us have to make is that good enough to cure the problem? And let me tell you how it would be cured. I went back to the statistics for the 2020 election. And in that election, obviously, Biden won. I don't think there's any real argument there. And the difference was about 7 million votes. Well, that's a fairly big number. But the electoral vote was a lot closer. That was 74 votes, about 1.3% or 1.4% of all the electoral votes swung that election. There were 3 million people during that election that did not vote for either the Democrat or Republican. But the count of votes between Biden and Trump were roughly 7 million. Okay? So the difference between all the votes were not just coming out of those who were independent. Okay. And they say, okay, where can we, if we ran a ticket, if they ran a ticket, and we, the independents, close your eyes and voted for him, because you're not going to be voting for the next president. Your selection will not be. I'm here to say that. I think they would say it if they were truthful. But can it change the game? And I think the answer is yes. So I said, well, what would it take? Okay. So I went back and make some calculations. And you would have to increase that independent vote of 3 million to get past, if you added 5 million to that level, which is not a lot. Okay, that's less than 2%. 2% of the electoral swings, those who have voted Democrat and Republican in the past vote independent. You have now exceeded the amount of votes that separated those two people. Okay, so who do I know which one you're going to take or who you're drawing from? No, I'm not even going to ask. So that's sort of the beginning. I don't think that's a win yet. But that's how small before you can think about winning. Okay? And when I say winning, I'm saying, let's say it's December of 2024, and they're analyzing what took place. And they said, gee, we could have won, we missed the, let's say, just like 2020, we missed the major vote by 7 million votes. Okay, or in this case, 74 electoral votes. And son of a gun, if the no labels didn't come up with a 15 millions voting that way. All of a sudden they said, holy crap, compared to the prior year where only 3 million, or prior run, only 3 million didn't vote the top two. That's a game changer. In my view, they'll analyze it. Whoever lost will definitely go there. Now, they won't quite be able to tell how many came out of their camp and how many came out of the Democratic camp. But they're going to start to think, well, Jesus, that vote was all about having a calmer environment in Washington. That's because that's what they say. And so that's how they're going to act. So you have a possibility to change the ball game for next time, not this time. Too bad, but not this time. But next time, yes. And if you get any higher than that, if you get into the 20 million or 25 million, you're going to change it, clearly. So there's a chance with 25 million out of what, about 155 million voted last year. So just think in those terms. Now, 25 is what, 1/6 of the total? So it's not a big, it's 16%, folks. And that's reachable, especially as this gets meaner and more divisive as we go toward November, and people get more and more disgusted at it. There is a way to change it. It won't change who the candidates are. Although I'll go back to where that's possible. But let's say they don't. They get a third string Democrat and a third string Republican run them, but they get 25 million votes. That changes it. Because this is a centrist move. Okay? And that's telling both parties you've gotten to the point that you are throwing an election, one or the other, that we lost this election because of the centrist vote. And both of them will, because both candidates, by the way, this is last Trump hurrah. This is last hurrah for Biden. So the next candidates come up will not be representative woke economic politics, and I guarantee you at 25 million, nor will the Republicans look for a Trump-type guy. Okay? So it is meaningful. It is here. And let's talk about, and this is hypothetical. I use the word hypothetical too many times, but this is, I'm going to say, possible. What if we could convince Manchin and Romney to have a radio show, a commentating show? They're not saying they're running, but let's say that they become popular, that people like to listen to them. Because if you've listened to both of them, they're, first of all, friends. I mean, friends. They go to each other's house. Then they're not going to be trying to, get to each other's jugular as they discuss the issues for the 2024 election. They're going to talk about their experiences. Manchin has already talked about that there's several Republicans that he has the highest respect for. I'm sure Romney could come up and say the same thing. And there is a sense of calmness about them, and they're very experienced. They're clearly qualified to run as a ticket, and both being qualified to be a president of the United States. What if that really catches on? What if they also happens, and I'll say it's not necessarily going to happen, but there's a high chance. What if Biden says, I'm too tired? What if the nation indicates in the polls he's just not physically able to last 4 years under that tremendously tough job, both mentally and physically, frankly? And I think in this case, there's more of a mental condition. They can pretty much have him. I mean, we had FDR, which was in a wheelchair, so I don't think the physical is going to deteriorate that much, but maybe mentally it could be. So there's the option that we could convince those two to be involved, at least at the commentator's standpoint, both being, I would think, acceptably centrist, but a clear Republican and a clear Democrat. They're not wishy-washy in those areas. And they gather viewers and opinions, positive opinions, across the nation. And I think they would. Every week. Now, they don't have to say they're going to run. In fact, they've said they're not. But what if Biden falls here? What if Biden stops and said, I can't do it? And let's say they choose a California governor as the next, or they choose the vice president to run. I think neither of them have a chance in hell, I would say, of a winning election against Trump. And I think at that point, because I'm going to tell you the Republican that I mentioned, Romney, he said he would never, I think ever is the word, ever, 4 times vote for Trump. Now that seems a pretty strong negative view of Trump from a significant Republican, okay, that ran for president against Obama, 2006 or 2008. Okay, so given that chance, they would be the only real, with a name, with a recognition, with all the Democrats would jump on that one, okay? And I think significant numbers of Republicans would jump on that and say, that's a centrist vote. And that's what this nation needs at this time. And I'll say at this time. I don't mean forever, because if next election cycle for president, the Republicans have nominated a clear Republican, but not one who's throwing cannonballs at the Democrats, and not the Democrat who's throwing Molotovs in the other direction. And so that need would go away. And so the no labels sponsor, and they probably would try to sponsor again, wouldn't be needed. So it would be available going onward. It's the third option. And I'd like you to hold that and think about it. And especially those who do not like the current choices in their own parties. So if you can monitor that, and it gates, it doesn't have to win the presidency, because it's clearly a long shot unless what I talked about hypothetically possibly happening would come. Then I would change my mind. Then I said, no, that's got a dang good chance to win. Okay, but in the absence of that, it doesn't. But just think of how that is winning. The winning can happen at 25 million votes, because it changes the environment. I mean, not this time, but 4 years from now. And I think everybody in America would say, thank God we're not going to go through this again. So that's it for tonight. I hope you think about it and watch the action, because until I hear what No Labels has done, I can't conclude, so to speak. But I'd hope you'd think about sending a note to Manchin and Romney and suggest that we need their voice, and they should consider having a voice on a national level during this election. Thank you.
You've been listening to United and Independent. What separates this show from others is that Richard has the background and experience to back it up. You can find detailed information on his background at the website united-and-independent.com. We hope you've enjoyed the show, and we hope you've gotten something from it. Make sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, follow us on social media. Thanks for helping to make a difference. See you next time on United and Independent.